The morning of September 1st, 1934 began like any other for Thomas Hunter Griffiths. The young stock agent's son was walking his prize bull back to the family farm along Howlong Road, 5 miles west of Albury. The fence ran to his right, the dusty road to his left, and the autumn air carried the familiar sense of the Australian countryside. Eucalyptus, dry grass, the earthy smell of the bull plodding beside him. But then he caught something else. Sharp, chemical, unmistakable. It was kerosene. Griffiths hitched his bull to the fence and stepped toward a concrete stormwater culvert where Splitters Creek passed under the road. What he saw protruding from that pipe made him abandon his prize bull and sprint, all the way back to his father's farm to telephone the police. Human legs. When Constable McRae and his colleagues arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. A young woman's body had been thrust head first into a common potato sack and stuffed into the culvert. Her head was wrapped in a blood-soaked towel. The lower half of her body was charred to what the police report described as a black mass. But it wasn't the burning that killed her. Medical examination would reveal the true horror. She'd been shot with a .32 caliber bullet that entered below her right eye and lodged in the back of her neck. Then, as if that weren't enough, someone had delivered 8 savage blows to her skull, likely with a tire lever or mallet, fracturing the bone and lacerating her brain. After she was dead, her killer had doused her body in kerosene and set it alight. A neighbour would later report seeing fire in that culvert in the early hours of August the 28th, 4 days before Griffiths made his discovery. Rain had extinguished the flames before they could complete their work, leaving behind evidence that would obsess Australia for decades. What captured the public imagination more than the violence, more than the calculated brutality, was what the victim was wearing when she died. Yellow silk pyjamas, embroidered with a Chinese dragon. Welcome to Struth, a podcast where we venture into Australia's most perplexing mysteries that continue to defy explanation decades later. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and today we're beginning a 2-part investigation into the Pyjama Girl murder, a case that stands as Australia's most infamous Depression-era crime. What appeared to be a solved case in 1944 has unravelled under modern scrutiny, revealing possible police corruption, fabricated evidence, and a victim whose true identity may never be known. This is a story of a woman found in yellow silk amid crushing poverty, of a body displayed like a carnival attraction for a decade, and of a justice system that may have chosen a convenient lie over an uncomfortable truth. Part 1 tells the story of the crime, the investigation, and the grotesque spectacle that followed. Part 2, which will be out in a couple of days, examines a suspicious confession that supposedly solved everything, and why modern researchers believe the Pyjama Girl's true name died with her. To understand exactly why the Pyjama Girl's clothing shocked the nation, you need to understand Australia in 1934. The Great Depression was tightening its grip. 32% of the workforce was unemployed. Families survived on SUSO, sustenance vouchers that bought basic food and nothing more. Men queued for hours for a day's labour that might never come. Women patched clothes until they couldn't be patched anymore. And in this world of crushing poverty, silk pyjamas with Chinese embroidery weren't just unusual, They were impossible. They were the sort of thing worn by young flappers in the pictures, by women who lived in King's Cross or St Kilda, by those who'd embraced what moral guardians called the modern lifestyle. The original inquest documents describe the garments precisely. White with a canary-coloured top, and the dragon design is in white silk on crepe. This wasn't sleepwear you bought at a department store. This was imported, exotic, expensive. And immediately, the victim became a symbol, not of tragedy but of warning. The newspapers didn't need to say it explicitly. The message was clear in every photograph, every description. This is what happens to young women who go astray. But there was more evidence at that culvert than just the pyjamas. The blood-soaked towel bore the initials RCO or RMO and was identified as Japanese in origin, likely imported to Sydney or Melbourne in 1933. No laundry association could trace those initials to any customer. The Hessian potato sack, when examined under infrared light, revealed partial letters DALM and ORE. Police believed this referenced the Dalmore farming district in Gippsland, Victoria, over 250 kilometres from where the body was found. The location itself also told a story. The culvert sat directly on the New South Wales-Victoria border. The body had been positioned so carefully that it would not have been visible to anyone driving past, despite 5 houses within sight of the road. The corpse had been carried some distance in a motor vehicle, perhaps 50 to 70 miles. This wasn't a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. This was calculated. Someone had shot her, beaten her, burned her, and transported her body to a location specifically chosen to complicate the investigation. A killer from Melbourne could dump a body in New South Wales, hoping jurisdiction would confuse the trail. It almost worked. With a face terribly deformed by 8 blows to the skull and flames that had charred half the body, traditional identification methods were useless. The victim's fingerprints produced no matches. Either she'd never been in trouble with the law, or her prints had been destroyed in the fire. Police faced an impossible question. Who was she? They compiled a list. It started with a few dozen names. Women reported missing, women who'd vanished without explanation, women whose families hadn't seen them in months or years. The list grew. 30 names, 50, 100. By the time they finished, police had identified 125 women as possible matches. 125. Each one would need to be traced, investigated, eliminated, or confirmed. Before police could identify anyone, they made a decision that would haunt Australian forensic ethics for decades. A decision that transformed tragedy into spectacle and human remains into public entertainment. They decided not to bury her. On the orders of the New South Wales Police, the unknown woman's body was transported to Sydney University's medical school. There, in a basement laboratory, technicians prepared a zinc-lined bath and filled it with formalin, a preservative so effective it could keep tissue from decaying indefinitely. They placed the pyjama girl in that bath, and there she stayed for 10 years. The reasoning was practical, police insisted. How could they identify her if they buried her? How could witnesses come forward to recognise her face if she was 6 feet underground? The preservation was temporary, they said, just until someone claimed her, just until they could put a name to the body. But temporary became months, months became years, and the pyjama girl became something Australia had never seen before, a permanent exhibition of death. Thousands came. They filed past the zinc bath in the medical school basement, staring at the woman floating in chemical preservation. Some came with genuine hope of identification, searching the distorted features for someone they'd lost. But many came for what the university registrar, Mr. Sell, called morbid curiosity only, and with no genuine claim. The university complained of a great amount of inconvenience, but the spectacle continued. Artists came to sketch her, photographers took pictures that police then doctored, trying to make the corpse look more lifelike for distribution. Around 1938, police officer Cecil Jardine created a death mask, a plaster cast of her face that could be displayed when the body itself wasn't available. Just imagine that for a moment. A woman murdered with extraordinary violence, reduced to an attraction, a curiosity, something people viewed on a Sunday afternoon, the way you might visit a museum, something straight out of a P.T. Barnum show. And through it all, the pyjama girl floated in a bath of formalin, waiting for someone to speak her name. By 1939, the case had become a national obsession. The government offered a reward of £1,000, an enormous sum during the Depression, enough to change a working family's life. Surely someone would come forward. Surely someone knew who she was. But 1939 brought something else entirely. Something that would cement the pyjama girl's place in Australian culture. Rupert Kathner and Elmer Brooks were not your typical filmmakers. They were con artists who financed their films through elaborate scams. They were described as the Bonnie and Clyde of Australian cinema. Charismatic, audacious, and utterly contemptuous of authority. When Police Commissioner Mackay specifically banned all newsreel coverage of the Pyjama Girl case, Kathner and Brooks saw opportunity. They hatched a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane, depending on your perspective. They would break into Sydney University's medical faculty, film the actual preserved body, and create what would become Australia's first true crime film. The break-in was meticulously planned. They brought a single light bulb to illuminate the basement. But when they finally stood before the zinc bath, hearts pounding, camera ready, the bulb broke. Standing in darkness with the body floating just feet away, plan completely ruined, they made a decision. If they couldn't film the pyjama girl in real life, they'd create their own. Alma Brooks herself played the corpse. They filmed a mock-up scene at a public bathhouse, Brooks lying perfectly still while Kathner's camera captured her from angles that would match the medical photographs. Then they reconstructed the crime scene at the culvert, used voiceover narration structured like a thriller, and set the whole thing to dramatic music by Wagner. The Pyjama Girl murder case premiered at Sydney's Capitol Theatre in August 1939. It was explosive. The film used reenactments, actual crime scene photographs, and Kathner's distinctive narrative style to transform the case into entertainment. The film became a sensation despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy. It proved that the Pyjama Girl had transcended mere criminal investigation. She'd become myth, legend, a story Australians told themselves about Depression-era darkness. But the film didn't solve anything. The body still floated in its bath. The 125 women on the list remained untraced, uneliminated, and as 1939 turned into 1940, 1941 and then 1942, the case continued to grow colder. The Pyjama Girl had been dead longer than some people had been alive. Police who'd worked the original investigation retired. New detectives inherited files that seemed unsolvable. And still, the body waited. Let's deviate just for a moment and talk about some of the women on that list of 125 names. There was Anna Philomena Morgan, a missing Sydney woman whose mother initially denied the body could be her daughter, denied it twice in fact. But then a Dr. Palmer Benbow, a controversial amateur forensic investigator who'd attached himself to the case, became convinced Anna was the victim. He pioneered facial measurement comparison techniques, taking meticulous measurements of the preserved corpse and comparing them to photographs of Anna. In 2022, researcher David Morgan used modern facial recognition software to re-examine Palmer Benbow's work. His conclusion? It's now easy to see why Benbow thought that the corpse was Philomena Morgan. She matches the body. But at the time, police claimed Anna Philomena Morgan was actually a woman named Jean Morris, stabbed 43 times in Queensland in 1932. Photographic comparisons don't support this claim, but it was enough for police to eliminate Anna from their list. Near the top of that alphabetical list was Linda Agostini. Born Florence Linda Platt on September 12, 1905 in Forest Hill, southeast London. As a teenager, she'd worked at a confectionery store in Surrey, selling sweets and tobacco. In 1926, after what was rumoured to be a broken romance, 19-year-old Linda emigrated to New Zealand and then moved to Australia in 1927. She settled in the infamous King's Cross, Sydney's bohemian heartland. The Cross in the late 1920s was Australia's answer to Montmartre or Weimar, Berlin. Cafes stayed open past 11 p.m, nightclubs flourished, and razor gangs controlled the sly grog trade. Crime figures Tilly Devine and Kate Lee ran rival empires. Writers mixed with artists in an atmosphere the Sydney Morning Herald described as gay and slightly sinister. Linda worked as a cinema usherette at a Hoyt's Picture Theatre. She trained as a hairdresser. She reportedly worked on cruise ships. She was only 5 feet tall, but described as attractive, very independent, particularly for the time. Family members said she was hot-tempered but also very sweet. Letters survive of her nursing a sick pet canary back to health. In 1928, she met Antonio Agostini, an Italian immigrant working at Romano's restaurant on York Street. They married on April the 22nd, 1930 at the Registrar General's office in Sydney. By 1933, Tony had moved them to Swanston Street, Carlton, Melbourne, reportedly to remove Linda from the influence of her Sydney friends, though what those influences were, no one would specify. Then, in late August 1934, right around the time a woman's body was being stuffed into a culvert outside Albury, Linda Agostini vanished. She was never reported missing by her husband. Tony Agostini would later claim she had simply left him. But when police checked Linda Agostini's dental records against the Pyjama Girl's teeth, they didn't match. Linda had 8 fillings in specific locations. The body, lying in the bath, had only 6, and in different places. So Linda Agostini, as many before and many after her, was eliminated from the list. The investigation continued. Other women were traced, other leads followed and discarded, but none of the 125 names led anywhere definitive. The years continued to pass, the war came. Italy joined the Axis powers, and suddenly thousands of Italian Australians found themselves classified as enemy aliens. Antonio Tony Agostini, who'd been writing an Italian-language newspaper with fascist sympathies, was among the first arrested. Antonio was born on May the 20th, 1903, in Altavole, Treviso, in far northern Italy. He was university educated, which was unusual for an immigrant of that era. He arrived in Australia in 1927, the same year as Linda, and initially leased the cloakroom at Romano's, Sydney's most glamorous restaurant. This was the kind of place where patrons dined in evening dress to orchestra music, where Sydney's elite went to see and to be seen. By the early 1930s, Tony had become a journalist for Il Giornale Italiano, a weekly Italian-language newspaper with 8,000 readers. The paper shared what it called patriotic fascism sympathies, support for Mussolini's regime. In 1930s Australia, before the war, this wasn't particularly controversial among Italian immigrants. Mussolini was rebuilding Italy, making the trains run on time and restoring national pride. But when Italy declared war on Britain on the 10th of June 1940, everything changed. Antonio Agostini was among the first arrested as an enemy alien. He spent the next 4 years moving between 3 internment camps: Orange in New South Wales, Hay in the Riverina, and finally Loveday in South Australia, the largest Commonwealth internment camp in the Southern Hemisphere. Nearly 5,000 Italians living in Australia were imprisoned during the war. Over 20% of the entire Italian-Australian population locked up simply for their heritage. Many were market gardeners, cafe owners, musicians. Most had lived in Australia for decades. Some even had Australian-born children serving in the armed forces. But none of that mattered. During his internment, something changed in Antonio. Fellow internees reported that he became disillusioned with the Italian Fascist Party. When Italy joined the Allies after Mussolini's fall in 1943, Agostini petitioned for release, and in January 1944 his petition was granted. In February 1944, he walked out of internment and back into a changed Sydney. He had no money, no prospects, no standing in the community. The journalism career was finished. No one wanted to employ a former fascist sympathiser. So he went back to where he'd started, Romano's restaurant on York Street. He became a waiter, a 41-year-old man serving food to Sydney's elite, many of whom had probably forgotten he ever existed. And it was there that he encountered an old acquaintance, someone who ate at Romano's regularly, someone who remembered Tony from before the war, Police Commissioner William John Mackay. By 1944, the Pyjama Girl case had become more than just an unsolved murder. It had become an embarrassment, a symbol of police failure that had been floating in a bath of formalin for nearly a decade, while the department claimed to be working diligently on the case. Commissioner Mackay was a man under enormous pressure. Known as Big Bill, 6 feet tall, weighing 95 kilograms, he was described as fearless, brilliant, and ruthless. He'd personally toured Nazi Germany in 1936, where he was impressed by the efficiency of the German police. He'd crushed the Darlinghurst razor gangs. But his department was mired in scandal, under constant criticism from the press for incompetence in being unable to close a long list of unsolved crimes. And right at the very top of that list, floating in its zinc bath, was the Pyjama Girl. In December 1943, Mackay assigned 2 new detectives to review the 125 files of women. Close to the top of that alphabetical list was Linda Agostini, previously ruled out because her dental records didn't match. And then, in February 1944, something remarkable happened. Next time on Struth, the trial that wasn't quite a trial, the verdict that didn't quite make sense, and the modern researchers who believe Australia convicted the wrong man, or rather, convicted the right man for killing his wife, but identified the wrong woman as the victim. The Pyjama Girl still has plenty of secrets to tell, And in 2004, a criminologist would publish evidence suggesting the official solution was nothing more than police corruption and a miscarriage of justice. Join us next time for part 2 of The Confession. To make sure you don't miss out, please like and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to give us a rating while you're there. And until then, remember, sometimes the most convincing evidence is the evidence that conveniently appears after 10 years in a bath of formalin. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.